So thank you very much for having us here this afternoon. And after Ivanic presented the raw materials that go into adhesives, let's talk a little bit about adhesives and the role that adhesives have in sustainable packaging and the opportunities that we have to enable sustainable and circular packaging in the market. So I'd like to start out with some trends in general, then talking about the various options that adhesives give us in sustainable and circular packaging, and then point out a path forward. So let's start out with the sustainability market trends. I think we have seen that around the globe is really the focus on the ban on single-use plastics, the shopping bags, the paper straws, cutlery, paper plates, and cups. We have seen these types of bans in all of the Indian subcontinent, in Europe, really across the globe. And I think one of the most important pieces of the most important resolutions here is the UN resolution on the end of plastic pollution that was passed in March last year, really with the intention of having a legally binding agreement by the end of next year. And I think that will really move things forward with regards to the plastic, single-use plastic that is being used. So one of the organizations that has really been looking very carefully at the use of plastics and what type of measures can be taken to reduce the amount of plastic that is being used is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And with the new plastics economy, which was launched in 2018, there are over 500 signatories of brand owners, of governments, NGOs, and various other organizations that really have that goal to reduce the amount of plastic that is being used, ensuring that the packaging and the plastic packaging that is being used can be recycled or can be reused, really driving that innovation to other types of packaging to reduce the plastic pollution, essentially. So when we look at that from a brand owner's perspective, when they are putting together their sustainability report, their goals, aligning their purpose with the UN sustainability development goals, they do what is called a materiality assessment. So here we have the example of Unilever. They look on the y-axis, the importance of their stakeholders, whether that is their employees, their customers, the communities where they are active, and then the business impact that that is going to have. So in the upper quadrant where you say, okay, this is of very high importance, both for stakeholders and for the business, put a little box around it because it's difficult to read here, is really the packaging and waste. Because in particular with consumer goods, it's that packaging that is then on the shelf. The consumer takes that split-second decision to say, I want this brand and not the other one. But then when they come home and use it, then that is the packaging that goes into the garbage can. So looking at the Indian legislation in particular, last year, July was the ban on single-use plastics. And in February last year, the extended producer responsibility, which really puts the onus on the brand owner to take responsibility for the packaging that they are putting into the market, the plastic waste that they are putting into the market, as well as electronic waste. So that means that the food industry is really pushed to reassess the type of packaging that they are using. Can they have alternatives to a plastic wrap? What are the options that they have? And in particular, the areas of food delivery, online food delivery, takeout food is really looking for alternative sustainable options that they can be using here. So that's really the opportunity for the paper industry to jump on board to say what type of paper bags, straws, cutlery, paper plates, and also packages for takeaway food can the paper industry develop here. So what does that look like in terms of the fiber-based options? So the paper folding carton options that we have here for single-use items, for packaging overall, and where does that take us in terms of the changing of the packaging materials? And just to take a quick look again at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the New Plastics Economy, with signing up for the New Plastics Economy, the participants there have to give an annual update on the progress that they have made with regards to changing their packaging types. So whether that is lightweighting, substituting to paper, substituting the plastic type that is more conducive to recycling, hopefully, or as you can see in the pie piece, the 22%, essentially eliminating the packaging and really making a real step change when we're looking at that. So let's look at the sustainable packaging options that adhesives can assist our customers with and the packaging design with. So when I'm thinking of adhesives, it's really a very small component of the overall packaging, but in my mind, a really, really important one, absolutely essential if you're thinking of the functionality of the packaging, really keeping the box closed, keeping the pack together, the label in place. The manufacturing of cardboard is also highly dependent on adhesives. And then thinking of the packaging lines, there are a lot of assets that are installed. So making fundamental changes is very costly. So at H.B. Fuller, we really see this as a step-by-step process. And there are small changes that can be done really to make progress, whether that is reducing the overall amount of adhesive that is being used by using the most modern, efficient technology, using low application temperature technology to reduce the amount of energy being used in the packaging plant to begin with. Then there's the topic of redesign, which is a really exciting area, really where a lot of parties come to the same table, the adhesive supplier, the brand owner, machine suppliers, really to say, how can we do it really differently and come up with a new design, something that is really reducing the amount of packaging materials that are being used. And then, of course, the recycling is absolutely key, making sure that the packaging that goes to the consumer's home that is then picked up and collected can be sorted appropriately and then recycled appropriately. And that's where the adhesives need to be designed to facilitate and enable that recycling process. And that's where at H.B. Fuller, we take great care of formulating accordingly and testing our adhesives for these recycling processes. And then, as the colleague from Evonik was explaining, there are really new raw materials that can be used, whether those are biosourced or other alternative fossil-free technologies that can be used. So looking at the options that we have with adhesives, I'd say one of the ones that comes to mind first when thinking on the ban of single-use plastics is really that of how can we replace those items. And here, of course, we have the paper straws. Both for cold and for hot drinks. And it is very similar technology that is then also used for stirrers. If you want to replace a spoon in a coffee cup, that's very similar adhesive technology that can be used for that. And this is one of my favorite examples because here we're talking really about the invisible, I like to call it the invisible packaging. It's the packaging that goes from the producer's warehouse to the distribution warehouse or even to a supermarket outlet if it's a larger supermarket. It's really that pallet, that transport packaging that ensures that the product gets to the next station in the logistics chain in a pristine condition and is delivered. And here the pallet stability is absolutely essential depending on the road quality, etc. These pallets tend to move a considerable amount on the backs of trucks, etc. And that's where adhesives can really play an important role in giving that pallet stability and thereby also reducing the overall amount of material that is used in that pallet, whether that is slip sheets, the amount of shrink wrap that is used on the pallet. There are really some great possibilities there to save on materials and at the same time maintain that pallet stability. So talking about recycling, when we're thinking of beverages, whether that is in glass bottles or in PET bottles, here it's really essential that the glass bottle can be reused or then the glass effectively recycled. Same with the PET. We want to have the PET really as clean as possible in order to go into that recycling process, because the PET recycling process is a bottle-to-bottle process. So here we need to make sure that cleanliness is really of the first order. And then the selection of the adhesive is absolutely key to make sure that in the wash-off process, the labels and the adhesives come off clean. To stay with the beverage industry, redesign is really an exciting area where much collaboration happens across the supply chain in order to come up with new innovative ideas of how to take out the plastic. These high cones that you see here in the middle of this slide, those plastic rings are really bad in the environment, and in particular for the animals. So that's really one of those things you want to get rid of when you have these types of cans. And there are various options of what can be done here thanks to adhesives. And you see those examples here on the right-hand side of the slide. When thinking about paper alternatives that can replace certain plastic packaging, whether that is a plastic bag, a plastic mailer, that's really where we need to, let's say, upgrade the paper, because paper itself does not have a moisture barrier or an oxygen barrier or a grease barrier. So there's multiple technology with barrier coatings that gives a certain degree of moisture resistance, grease resistance, oxygen resistance to the paper so that it can be used in various applications. So here I'm thinking about some general performance bags. We're working with customers on takeout food packaging, also for paper cups, for example. So here we really have quite a few possibilities of how paper packaging and paper items can be upgraded in order to give them better functionality thanks to the barrier coating technology, and thereby replace plastic items. When looking at e-commerce, really e-commerce has vastly increased in the last few years. The growth has been absolutely exponential, very much accelerated by the pandemic. And here we have alternatives. Instead of using a simple plastic tape to open a box or a mailer, we have a fiber-based alternative. I like to call it highly engineered paper, in order to open the envelope or a package, and thereby not having plastic in the packaging, but rather having more fiber that then goes back into the recycling stream. And again, referring back to the colleague from Evonik, there's really some exciting new raw materials that are coming on the market that we are working with our suppliers in order to have fossil-free raw materials, whether that comes from renewable raw materials, but there's also some great technology coming out of carbon capture in order for us to build raw materials based on that. So here we are always very careful to make sure that we are not competing with the food supply chain. We want to be very sure of that. And also using the same ISCC Plus certification process that the gentleman before me explained in great detail, in order to ensure that the raw materials that we are using for these products really are what we certify them to be. So in terms of the path forward, I already alluded to it a little bit. It is really that collaboration across the supply chain. If we're looking at the needs that we have for packaging going forward in the next few years, the changes that we have to implement are really tremendous. And in order for us to in order for us to be able to make these changes, come up with these new solutions, it is really for the entire industry supply chain to work together to find these new opportunities and new designs and ways of packaging our goods. And at the same time, of course, everybody has to do their own homework. And I just want to leave you with this example of our factory in Pune, which last year installed solar power generation, which covers roughly 30% of the electricity needs on an annual basis at our location. And H.B. Fuller being an adhesive powerhouse, we of course also have adhesives for solar panels, so we can proudly say that the solar panels on the roof of the factory and the car park at our Pune location has our own adhesive in that installation. So I'll leave you with that, and then we can have questions at the end of all of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth.